So, theoretically, this should be the first episode you're seeing where we're doubling down. It might not be. I'm not sure. It'll be either this episode, the next one, or the next one. But I'll go ahead and announce it here, because one way or another, this is the first possible time for it. I've decided after considerable thought we're going to go ahead and double up on Babylon 5, now that Voyager has been completed. That means we'll be hitting Babylon 5 on both Monday and Tuesday, henceforth. I'm not going to triple up, because I'm already having a hellacious time, having enough time to do the show as is, but this is just going to be basically the same amount of time I was already putting in. You know, it's just Babylon 5 again instead of Voyager. This also means that Babylon 5 will be done in somewhere around mid-November instead of sometime around next March. That means we will probably be starting TNG and DS9 sometime around December. I plan to take a little bit of a breather period there and just kind of recoup and really process and get ready, because just starting TNG and Deep Space Nine is going to be a really big deal. So, for those of you who are really interested in TNG and Deep Space Nine Ruminations, those are going live most likely at this point in the beginning of December. Now, on to the episode. So, good episode. As ever, telling the story of before, between, and after. I don't actually have a lot to say on this one. A lot of it is on display, a lot of it's fairly obvious stuff, and a lot of this is just kind of cleanup. Episodes like this, some people say episodes like this are the downside of having string continuity storylines. Babylon 5 being a string continuity series. Not a lot of other examples for me to use right off the top of my head. Game of Thrones would be another example of a string continuity series. On the off chance you've never heard me talk about it, a string continuity is one episode leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, and overall character arcs and plot arcs going across multitudes of episodes. So the whole story is just kind of one cohesive story. It's just being told in bits. There's been a lot of argument about that mentality versus setting continuity, which is something more like The Next Generation, where we acknowledge that these are the same characters as last time, and the events that have changed the setting alter, but each episode usually doesn't really have anything to do with the previous one, and absence of continuity. Twilight Zone is actually the best example of that, where each episode is completely standalone and has nothing to do with the rest. Overall, these three perspectives are the ways to do television, and there's some blurring of the lines in between, but yeah, I just wanted to define that really quick. So anyways, this episode is basically just cleanup and starting the next arc, really. Or I should say, restarting the next arc. You didn't seriously think that JMS forgot about the Earth situation, right? If you'll remember, during all of the build-up through Season 1 and 2 of The Shadows, there was also the build-up of Earth and the Clark administration. And that was always in the backdrop, except when it came into the foreground. I shouldn't even say backdrop. It was one of the major arcs of the setting. It only got paused because we had to deal with the Vorlon and the Shadow situation. Now, the Vorlons and the Shadows are gone. And now all we have left is the Clark administration. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this yet, but all I'm going to say is that for me, I think this is a very logical place to go. It's what I would have done as a storyteller. If you'd handed me the setting as is at the end of the Shadow War and said, all right, where do you go? Without even thinking, we go back to Earth. In summary, it's going to be a different type of conflict than the Shadow War. The Shadow War was the big, grand, epic, whoa! Earth is going to be a little more down to earth. No pun intended. It's going to be a little more personal. And we've already seen that in this episode. But this episode is kind of weak, getting back to what I was saying originally. It doesn't really have a lot of strength to stand on its own 2 feet. And that, many people have said, is the negative side of this type of storytelling. Now, I don't personally agree with that. In fact, I adamantly disagree with that. To me, standalone episodes like The Twilight Zone just make me utterly uninvested. You know, it's like, okay, whatever, and I just walk away. I don't even care. But that is only my opinion, and I want to at least showcase that, because this is kind of a weak episode. It doesn't really do much. It has some good character moments for Garibaldi, which I'll talk about, some great character moments for Londo, albeit very brief, and some great character moments for Bester. And that's it. That's basically the pluses of the episode. But let's move on. Let's move on. So first, of course, we have to have the A New Hope moment. It's not a phrase I use often enough. Maybe I should add it to the Lorium index that I've been slowly building. But A New Hope moment is pretty obvious. We have just won a battle we shouldn't have. You know, it's not just celebration. It's like throwing yourself with exuberant desperation into a celebration. Because, holy crap, did we actually do that? And everyone involved knows that their troubles aren't over. They even talk about it in this episode. Now what? It's just that recurring theme that I mentioned last time, and comes up all over the place in this episode. Now what? And everyone knows, now what? Now we got to deal with something. But they still need this victory. They need to just celebrate the moment. And, funnily enough, Londo himself said something like that last time. Should I be happy? And actually, it was Veer, excuse me. Veer's the one who said, I think they could allow you one night of being happy. Just the one. Now, what Clark does here makes a lot of sense, and is funny because it's so obvious, and yet that doesn't make it easy to counteract. The Earth situation, I'm actually partially looking forward to and partially afraid to talk about. I'm not going to start talking about it here because it's just going to develop over time, and we'll talk about it as we go. But it is immensely complex. There is a lot of shadings and layers and tricky situations with the Earth situation, and that's one of the things I like about it. It's just difficult to talk about because it is so complex. I'm going to have to actually sit and be like, okay, makes sense up here, but getting from here to here is harder than it sounds. But I bring this up because this move makes a lot of sense for Clark to make, because Clark is a weak man. He always has been. He's always been characterized as a weak individual who only ever clawed his way up to power because he happened to be receptive to the idea, happened to be connected to a few people, and people who are stronger than him were backing him because they could control him easier. Remember, the person on the throne is not necessarily the one in charge, and the people who have the real power tend to prefer people who are easier to control. Thus, a weak person sitting on a throne is more advantageous for those who are actually in control of the real political power of a situation. This is not exclusive to Babylon 5. This has been true in real life, in fiction, across virtually everything ever. So Clark, who is now on the throne, has just lost his biggest backers. Some of his other supporters are still there. Lord knows the Psi Corps is still a fairly major player. But that's a problem for Clark, isn't it? Because now he's probably just as afraid of the Psi Corps as he ever was before, and now he needs to scramble to deal with things because, oh god, oh god, oh god. You can almost feel the panic in it. He's not even in this episode. You can almost feel his panic palpably perpetrating through the palpacy of... I can't think of any other P words. He's panicking. I also... Let's cut that off for now. So he does the very obvious thing. He cuts Earth off from transports legally, of course, which is either going to encourage smuggling or really hurt certain pocketbooks. But by legally cutting off transport to Bab 5, he's basically performing a form of economic warfare. Because you might say, well, you can just smuggle to get around that. And that's true, but smuggling is invariably more expensive than the legal method. That's one of the two reasons why smuggling exists. The other reason, ironically, being that smuggling sometimes is cheaper than the legal method. If it's either banned or it's more expensive, that's why smuggling exists. This is it. This is it right here. This is the reasoning for smuggling. I mean, yeah, there's other individual reasons, but as far as an enterprise, right? So now it's banned. So he's trying to hit him in the pocketbook, and Lord knows they're only making so much money as is. Now, there was actually several episodes where they went way out of their way to emphasize how much effort they were putting into encouraging alien races to keep running through there so they could keep getting funded, so they could keep functioning. But they've already been cut off from supplies from Earth. Now they're being cut off from people just selling stuff from Earth. That's really going to hurt a lot of things. Basically, that's just a lose-lose for Babylon 5. So that's a very obvious move, but a very difficult one to counter overtly. I swear I can talk. Now let's talk about Garibaldi. Garibaldi, as he's been presented thus far, is a very weird example of someone who doesn't know how to lie very well, but he isn't obvious in his avoidance of a truth. He does have a particular pattern he follows when he's trying to avoid saying something. Now, I point that out because that has been well established well before now. And we also know Garibaldi's been kind of wonky in the head ever since he got back from who knows what. We still don't know. Well, in this episode, we he sees the graphic. Nice touch on the graphic, by the way, on the effects team, and we shadings of control and the Talia Winter situation. How's that for ironic? And then he starts avoiding the question when he gives his reasons for leaving. This is the pattern Garibaldi uses. Why are you A? Well, why am I A? Well, because of all of these other true things that are indirectly connected to A. In other words, he doesn't just try to deflect. He doesn't do an obvious deflection. He does a complex deflection to something that is true, that is sort of connected to the situation, and therefore makes sense, but it's one of those, you have to pause and be like, yeah, okay, I could see that. You know what I mean, right? It's just, I actually have a hard time explaining this because I'm a moron. But it's so obvious when I see people lie like this, when they just deflect to, it's effectively the same as pulling it technically, because it's not literally the same thing, but it's the same mentality. Well, I'm going to divert you because technically this and this and this are connected too, and I mean, I just want to have a happy ending, and I just want to have this, and who knows what's going to happen next, and all that fun stuff, right? And all of that is true, and all of that is connected. But it's not why he's doing it. And it's so obvious with the way they've built up the character that he is lying in the best way he has available to him. Now, what's funny to me is that nobody picks up on that except for Zach, who has been treated as a secondary character, sometimes as a guest star or an extra sometimes, and yet Zach, well, obviously is slowly kind of making his way up the rungs of being a main character. And he picks up on it. Twice, actually. And then Garibaldi, when Zach directly confronts him about it, Garibaldi does the exact same trick except even more aggressive. Because now, in addition to the deflection to truth, he also adds in a personal touch. He gets in a laugh. He tells it with like a jocular age, like, oh, well, haha, we're just buddies. And he gets in personal with the knowledge he has of the individual he's talking to. And, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm checking my notes here. So, there's some nice tidbits here. Lita's room is great. I have a question for you. How much do you think Lita has been altered in her, shall we say, pattern of thinking by what the Vorlons did to her? I would say at least a little bit, because she finally has the ability to have her own room. And I already discussed the psychological torture that was earlier. So now she can do whatever she wants with her room, and so she just goes out and buys a bunch of random crap and just smears it out and no idea what to do with it. When we come back later, she has managed to get a table, like a little cheapo table, and has crap on there now, and a chair, and another different chair, but it's so clear she's not used to, shall we say, human sensibilities like she might have once been. And I don't know if it's just because she doesn't know what to do with herself or because she's literally different. That's why I postulate the question. Now, another thing that I like is that she flat out mentions, nobody reaches out to me. Nobody just tries to be my friend. A little bit of out of character thing there. See, the thing is, Lita Alexander was never... I've already talked about how she came in and then left, and then Talia Winters came in and then left, and then she came back in. And so now we're kind of stuck with her. A little out of character point, because the actress, whose name I can't remember right now, forgive me, was rumored, this is not confirmed, I want to make that clear, but was rumored to have basically gone and said, okay, I'm on the title credits, why don't I have any good character scenes? Everything I've been doing is basically as a tool to advance the plot. I certainly have an important role in the show, but I would like some character moments. And that kind of ties in nicely with the in-character perspective, because they were kind of saddled with her. They never really chose her. And she kind of had the whole Vorlon situation, which was bad for multiple reasons. And now it's like, well, okay. But I do like how Zach bothers to go out and reach out to her. And what's funny is he probably means that at least a little bit flirtatiously, because Zach's a single guy, and Lita Alexander is an exceptionally attractive woman. But I don't think it was just flirtatiously. I don't think he was just trying to get into her pants. I think Zach, being a fairly simple kind of guy, was just like, okay, you're kind of lonely and nobody's really interacting with you, so yeah, okay, I'll bring a pizza by and I'll help you out. Why not? I don't mind. And then he does it at the end. Nice little succinct callback. So before I get to the rest of the Lita stuff, though, I want to talk about Bester. Now, first of all, it's always great to see Walter Koenig as Bester. He is, without question, one of my favorite villainous characters. I wish I could properly explain it, but I am not a brain doctorate of science-y magico-ness. It's a real term. So instead you're just going to have to listen to me kind of ramble and hope I get it across. Because what Bester is he is a complicated individual. He is a complex character. And what are you doing? He is a complex character. He's a complex individual. He has wants and desires that aren't purely evil. He is evil. He is willing to work with the good guys as an ally. He wants to work with the good guys as an ally because their ends, happen to coincide in many ways. He is against their overall combined enemy, and he is not... One of the mistakes so much of fiction makes is they'll present a bad guy. I'm just going to say that in that generic term. Bad guy. And then they try to soften them by showing, oh, well, they care about this or they show this to make them seem more good. And that's the mistake. You don't need to do that. You can, but you don't need to do that. Instead, what we have here, and with complex characters, is we show a villain who has positive traits. They're still a villain! Make that point clear. Bester is still an evil man who is... Well, let's just not go into it, but he's horrible. But that does not mean he is universally evil. That does not mean he is cartoonishly evil. He still has positive character traits. It's kind of like the Bloody Baron over in Witcher 3. We actually had a long discussion/argument about that on stream when I was doing the live rumination for Witcher 3. And it boiled down to some people being like, he's a better person because of this. No, he's a horrible person. And it's like, no. He is a horrible person who has positive traits. We can have this complexity in a character. And it's surprisingly rare to see that kind of complexity in fiction. That's why I like it. I don't really want to bring this up, but it's kind of similar to something over in Deep Space Nine with Dukat, who was someone who was unquestionably an evil character, who nevertheless had positive character traits, and every now and again was allowed to really use them. So I love that complexity. I also... there's a nice little bit where Sheridan says, we'll do this, blah, 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 I give you my word. I find it interesting that Bester capitulates so quickly and easily there. That makes sense, though. Sheridan is honest. I've talked about this before, and this is going to be a continuing, relevant plot point, believe it or not, Sheridan's honesty. So he gives his word. The end. He is going to take him to Zahadum because he gave his word on the matter. And he does. And then Lita destroys it. Wish she could have destroyed it a little bit earlier. I also like the simple honesty of how Lita gives her reasoning for why she destroyed it. Which brings me to Sheridan again. Sheridan, some people have argued whether or not Sheridan was right or wrong in what he did, in what he said and how he said it to Lita at the end of the episode. But I'm kind of on Sheridan's side on this one. He is a military commander who needs information and intel on a situation. If one of his own people goes rogue, without his knowledge, he can't do anything about that other than adapt after the fact. In fact, they were in danger. The only reason that they were fine was because he picked up on it immediately, realized what was going on, and said, turn about now. And it took Bester a few more seconds to be like, huh? And it was only that Bester only picked up on it because Sheridan laid it out for him. So, in a military chain of command situation like that, which is how Sheridan thinks, militarily minded, you need that information to go up. There's a funny twist here, though. Sheridan himself has already gone rogue to do what he believes is right. And I'm not saying Sheridan is right or wrong in therefore coming down like a ton of bricks on Lita, even though I do kind of agree with him. My point is that it's not a always right, always wrong answer. There's no book that says you're always wrong to go rogue or you're always right to go rogue under these circumstances. It's just case by case. Now, the funny thing is, in this circumstance, based on what we know, Lita could have gone to him and said, I want to destroy Zahadum, to remove it so that Bester doesn't get any of it. And Sheridan would have like, okay, I'm with that. And she's like, I can block him from scanning you, but I need you to not be thinking about it, just so there's no surface thoughts when we get there. And then Sheridan could have adapted and dealt with it appropriately. But that whole going rogue thing and the legal rights and military chain of command and making decisions without call and all that, that's very subtly laying a brick in what's going to be a whole wall of intrigue over the rest of the season. Now, I don't actually have much else to say about Bester. Most of this episode, he is still playing games. He's still got the masks on. The only time he is ever overtly honest is when he's actually talking to the cryobed containing his lover. He's like, okay, look. And he lays it all out. And that scene is brilliant. Walter Koenig is just talking to a prop and nails it. It's basically a monologue, but he does nail it. It's a great scene. I don't have anything else to add to that, really. It is just a great scene. Quick segue. So, meanwhile, back on Centauri Prime, we have Bob Face. I can't remember his name. He's actually been a recurring character for many episodes with the Centauri. The guy they name Regent, the toady, who's been following Londo around for most of his time on Centauri Prime, is named Regent. It's actually a great scene, because the guy is obviously a sniveling little nobody. Now, let me make this clear. I don't hate him. I don't hate his character. But he is, as I've already said, an example of what is wrong with the Centauri culturally, in many ways. If you've forgotten, he's the one who made the joke about how many dead Narn, blah, 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 to Veer. You remember that? That was several episodes ago. So, what I like, though, is that he is named Regent. Now, he himself knows what that means. He is politically savvy enough to know that that means sit, look pretty, make unimportant decisions, and get paid well for it. And he understands that. But what I love about that is he has been demonstrated thus far to be a character effectively absent ambition. The kind of person who's just willing to go with the status quo. So that is the perfect job for him. And the actor nails it. When he hears the news, he's like, I can't do it. I'm not that good with my facial expressions. But he starts off like shock, and then more shock, and then joy, and then reining in the joy, and then confirming hesitantly, is it, you're mean, really? And he just, yes! You could tell how much he's like, oh, this is perfect! And how much he wants this role. Really nails that. I'm thinking pastels. But then, well, before I go on to that, let me just save that in the back of your mind. Londo has been behaving differently for some time. I've pointed this out, of course. But he continues to behave differently because now he has the mask back up, but the mask no longer fully covers his face, to stretch the analogy a little bit. A lot of the strength that Londo has been projecting is now peeking out of that mask. And he shows this several times in this episode, where he's back to playing the typical Centauri, ambassador with great political power and prestige and all that, part of the Centaurum. And yet, a lot of the real Londo is now peeking out under that and showcasing his real mentalities, his refusal to back down. No, he's not sniveling anymore. He is past caring at this point. And my favorite examples come one after another. There's this merchant who's trying to charge him for something. He says, no, I'll give you 20 for both. Just, bam, flatlines that. And then he turns and sees Jakar. And the first thing he does is he looks away shamefaced, but then he steels himself, and he turns back and he walks right up to Jakar. That takes some balls. He knows Jakar is more than willing to kill him right there on the Zocalo. But he still walks up to him. It's like, all right, I'm here. That fear that used to qualify Londo is just gone at this point. And then Jakar tells him, you do not exist anymore. We're done. And it's interesting because that really shows how far Jakar has come, too. His ability to be able to let all of the horribleness that Londo both directly and indirectly caused him wash away, but he's not willing to give him any leeway either. He's not willing to give him an inch. It's just, all this negative doesn't exist anymore. And neither do you. You are not even on the ledger anymore. So, there's also a nice quiet touch where Londo mentions how he'll be in touch if the Regent needs him. Keep that in mind for later, by the way. And then the episode ends. And now this is why I want you to keep Mr. Regent in your mind, because I don't exactly hate him, but I've never liked him. He's a sniveling toady in many ways. But when I see the end of this episode, where he wakes up disturbed by a dream and finds a thing with an eye, right about here, my sympathy levels admittedly rise, because call me horrible, call me terrible, but I'm one of those people that there's certain fates I don't wish on anyone. I don't mind mentioning the name of those things. I don't think the name is a spoiler. We don't find out the name of what those things are for a while, but those things are called keepers. Oh, keepers. Oof. Yeah. I feel like this is the third or fourth time I've said this in this show, but if there is one truth about Babylon 5, it's that things can always get worse. So we've got Bad Mojo coming back from Earth, and something which is clearly foreshadowed to be related to the Shadows, no pun intended, now dealing with the Regent back on Centauri Prime. Joy. See you next time, guys.